Welcome to Silent Revenge, where the people you trust the most can become the architects of your deepest pain. I never imagined that a simple signature could ignite a storm that would tear my family apart. But when my daughter-in-law screamed at me, shoving me against the garage wall and demanding, "Sign this now," I realized the betrayal had already begun. What I learned that day would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and justice. I still remember the hollow echo of her voice, sharp and demanding, ricocheting off the walls of my garage. "Sign this now." She shoved me again, harder this time, and I stumbled backward, my shoulder slamming against the cold, concrete wall. Pain flared, but it was nothing compared to the shock burning through my chest. That scream wasn't just about a piece of paper. It was about power. And I realized, in that moment, that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. My name is Margaret Kane, and for 35 years, I built my life around trust, my children, my home, and my modest but successful bookkeeping business. I had pride in my reputation, in being the mother and grandmother who always tried to keep the peace. I never expected that my own son's wife, Emily, would become the weapon of betrayal. But betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears the face of someone who laughs at your jokes, drinks tea in your kitchen, and tells you she loves you. When she lunged at me, I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes, greed, fear, and a cold calculation that made my stomach twist. I felt humiliation bubble up, mingling with the anger and disbelief. How could someone I welcomed into my family act like this? How could she demand something from me as if my life, my consent, my dignity were meaningless? And then it hit me. This wasn't just a push against my body. It was a push against everything I had built. I took a deep breath, pressing my back against the wall, forcing myself to stay upright. My mind raced, flashing through every interaction I'd had with her over the last year, the sly remarks, the subtle undermining, the way she always insisted on helping, with decisions that weren't hers to make. I had ignored the warning signs, convinced myself she was just ambitious, just overbearing. But ambition can be lethal when it hides beneath a mask of charm. As I watched her stomp toward me, waving the contract like a sword, I realized I had two choices: give in and let the humiliation consume me, or fight back smarter, sharper, with a plan she could never predict. And that's when the first flicker of a dangerous resolve sparked inside me. I wouldn't let her win, not this way, not now. The moment she shoved the paper into my hands, I realized this wasn't just about a signature, it was about control. Emily's smirk was icy, almost rehearsed, as if she had anticipated my shock and hesitation. "Sign it, Mom," she hissed, leaning so close I could feel the heat from her anger. "Or you'll regret standing in my way." My heart hammered. I had no idea what she was talking about, but the weight of those words settled like a stone in my chest. I glanced at the contract she shoved under my nose. My name was there, clearly, unmistakably, and beneath it, the terms twisted my life into knots I hadn't expected. My son Andrew was nowhere in sight, conveniently absent, leaving Emily alone to wield this threat like a weapon. My hands trembled as I skimmed the fine print, and the betrayal hit me harder than her shove. She wasn't just overstepping. She was attempting to seize control of the family estate, manipulating my son's absence, and turning my own home into a battlefield. "Emily, what is this?" I asked, my voice shaking but trying to maintain calm. My words seemed to amuse her. Her eyes glinted with that smug superiority that had always unsettled me. "It's just paperwork," she said, tilting her head, "but if you don't sign, you'll see what happens when I decide to act without your interference." Her tone was casual, but her intent screamed danger. I staggered backward again, leaning against the wall, struggling to process the audacity. I had raised Andrew to be considerate, respectful, moral. How had I missed this? How had I allowed someone to worm into our family so completely, to bend my son to her will without me noticing? Rage and fear collided in my chest. She had crossed a line, and it wasn't just legal, it was personal. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to yell, to shove her back, to make her feel even a fraction of the humiliation she had inflicted. But I knew that would only give her the upper hand. No, this required something more calculated. I needed a strategy, something precise and untraceable, something that would make her regret underestimating me. As she leaned closer, a dangerous confidence radiating from her every movement, I felt a cold clarity settle in. I would not be intimidated. I would not give her control. And in that moment, A single thought burned in my mind. She had no idea the storm she had just unleashed. I closed the garage door behind her, the slam echoing like a verdict. The house suddenly felt colder, emptier, as if her audacity had sucked the warmth from the walls. I sank onto the workbench, my mind a storm of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. How had I let it get this far? How had Emily infiltrated our lives so completely that she could wield threats against me with my own son absent and unaware? Memories of small slights flickered across my mind, her subtle undermining during family dinners. The way she questioned my decisions with Andrew, as if I were incompetent. The sly compliments that hid venom. At the time I had laughed them off, dismissed them as over-sensitivity. But now the pattern was undeniable. She had been chipping away at me for months, maybe years, and I had been blind. The shame burned. I felt exposed, weak, vulnerable, like a fox cornered in its own den. Tears threatened, but I refused them. Crying wouldn't fix this. Rage could be harnessed. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to force my thoughts into order. My son would be furious if he knew. Yet, deep down, I feared he was already under her sway, drawn in by her charm and relentless manipulation. Could I convince him of the truth before it was too late? The thought made my chest tighten with a mix of despair and determination. I imagined confronting her outright, screaming at her, shoving her back as she had done to me. But that would be theater, not justice. She thrived on theatrics. It was her weapon. No, I needed something quieter, sharper, a calculated response that would hit where it hurt and expose her duplicity without leaving me vulnerable. The idea of revenge flickered like a candle in the dark, small but growing. Yet even as I contemplated it, doubt gnawed at me. Could I outmaneuver someone so cunning? My hands shook with the weight of responsibility and fear. One misstep and I would become the victim, humiliated further. But then a cold, resolute voice inside whispered, "You've survived worse. You are smarter than she believes. Let her underestimate you." The house seemed to listen, the walls holding the echoes of that single, defining moment. I realized that my humiliation wasn't the end, it was the catalyst. If I let it crush me, she would have won completely. If I let it guide me, however, I could turn the tables. I spent the night in silence, the house around me dark and still, but my mind refused to rest. Every detail of Emily's attack, the shove, the words, the contract, replayed in vivid, merciless loops. Sleep would have been a luxury I couldn't afford. Betrayal demands strategy, not exhaustion. And if I moved too hastily, I would become the fool, the victim, the one humiliated again. I needed patience. I needed precision. I began by cataloging every interaction, every small betrayal I could recall. The dinners where she subtly questioned my authority, the compliments that felt like daggers, the way she manipulated Andrew without him noticing. Each tiny act of deceit was a thread, and I intended to weave them into a rope strong enough to pull her down. My hands shook slightly as I scribbled notes, diagrams, and timelines, but the trembling was anticipation, not fear. The first step, I realized, was understanding her weaknesses. She was meticulous, but predictable in her overconfidence. She underestimated me at every turn. She believed intimidation and charm were enough to control me, to control my family. That arrogance was her Achilles' heel. I would use it. I would let her feel untouchable while laying the foundation for her unraveling. I considered the legal implications, the financial leverage she sought through that contract. Consulting a lawyer seemed obvious, but I couldn't let her suspect I was gathering allies. Every move had to appear casual, innocent, even compliant. I needed Andrew's eyes open too, but he had to arrive at the truth naturally, seeing the pieces fall into place. Otherwise, he might defend her blindly. Then I mapped out scenarios: if she pushed too hard, if she tried to manipulate the family further, if she escalated threats. Each scenario had a corresponding response, subtle but effective. I realized revenge wasn't about impulsive confrontation. It was psychological, strategic, and devastatingly precise. She had forced my hand, but she would never see mine coming. By the time dawn crept over the horizon, a plan had crystallized. It was risky, yes, but every successful act of justice carried risk. I felt a grim satisfaction, a quiet thrill. For the first time since that shove, I felt control returning to my hands, like electricity sparking beneath my skin. Emily had triggered something in me, a patient, calculating resolve that would not rest until balance was restored. The first step was subtle, almost invisible, but devastating in its intent. I started planting seeds of doubt, not aggressively, not openly, but in the smallest moments that Emily would never suspect. A comment here, a carefully phrased question there, all designed to make her question her control. I watched her reactions closely, noting the slightest twitch of a smile, a flicker of hesitation. She was meticulous, yes, but overconfidence makes the sharpest blades dull. I began with Andrew. I didn't confront him outright. Instead, I dropped hints, posed innocent questions, recounted small incidents that seemed trivial, but painted a picture of Emily's manipulation. "Didn't you notice how she handled the estate documents last month?" I asked casually over breakfast. His brow furrowed, a small crack forming in the armor she had built around him. I smiled inwardly. Patience was key. One seed carefully nurtured would grow into awareness. Next, I turned my attention to Emily's own networks. Friends, coworkers, anyone who might overhear or feel the strain of her schemes. I never lied, I simply framed facts in ways that made her ambition appear reckless, her behavior overbearing. The whispers began to reach her ears, subtle enough to unsettle without giving away my hand. The smirk that once defined her confidence started to falter. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she hesitated before speaking at family dinners. Meanwhile, I studied the contract she had shoved at me, the legal loopholes, the phrasing, the hidden obligations she believed I hadn't noticed. I kept a copy, annotated and ready, so that when the moment came, I could turn her own weapon against her. Every detail mattered. Every clause was a potential misstep on her part. My humiliation had sharpened my mind, my anger had focused it. By the end of the week, subtle changes were noticeable. Andrew questioned, Emily hesitated, and I could feel the balance shifting, quietly, invisibly. I wasn't reckless, I was methodical. Each small victory built momentum, each doubt planted eroded her confidence. And yet, the hardest part was restraint. I had to suppress the urge to confront her outright, to let impatience ruin the carefully laid plan. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of the study, I realized the first cracks were showing. Emily had begun to sense the shift, but she didn't understand it. She believed she still had control. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. She was walking blind into the storm I had created, and when it hit, there would be no escape. The subtle cracks I had planted were beginning to widen into chasms. Emily no longer moved with her usual confidence. At family dinners, her words stumbled, her carefully crafted smiles faltered. I could see it in the way she glanced at Andrew for reassurance, seeking the anchor she once held over him. The thrill of watching her unravel was intoxicating, but I knew better than to let it rush me. Escalation had to be precise. I intensified my approach. I left small, undeniable traces of her manipulations where they couldn't be ignored, emails she thought were private, notes she had carelessly left in plain sight, discrepancies in the estate paperwork she assumed I hadn't checked. Each tiny revelation built pressure, forcing her to react while keeping her unaware of the orchestrator. She believed the chaos was coincidence, but every misstep she made was under my careful watch. Andrew started asking questions openly now. "Mom, why would she do this?" He murmured one evening, frustration and confusion etched across his face. I nodded, feigning concern, letting him connect the dots without my interference. It was intoxicating to watch him awaken to the reality I had been silently revealing. Yet it reminded me that timing was everything. If he confronted Emily too soon, she would retreat and rebuild. The strike had to come when she was cornered, vulnerable, and blinded by her own arrogance. I also started creating subtle pressure in Emily's social circle. Friends noticed contradictions in her stories. Colleagues sensed her growing desperation. Rumors began circulating, carefully curated by my observations and small nudges. She felt the walls closing in, though she couldn't pinpoint why. I could see it in her gestures, the way she tapped her fingers, the slight tremor in her voice. Her composure, once untouchable, was crumbling, but the most powerful move was yet to come. I had discovered a hidden clause in the contract she had shoved at me, a single line that could invalidate everything she had schemed to claim. I studied it obsessively, mapping every possible defense she might muster. By the time I revealed it, it would be too late for her to salvage her grip. As I watched her pace the living room that evening, muttering under her breath, a mixture of fear and frustration, I felt the full weight of control shift. She thought she was winning, but every step she took tightened the net around her. And when the moment came, the fall would be complete, swift, inescapable, and devastating. The day it all came crashing down began quietly, deceptively ordinary. Emily had no idea I had compiled every misstep, every deception, every subtle manipulation she had thought was invisible. I didn't confront her publicly, didn't scream or accuse. Those were the tools of amateurs. Instead, I let the evidence speak, strategically placing it where Andrew, her friends, and even her colleagues would see it without question. It started with Andrew discovering inconsistencies in the estate documents. He called me late that evening, his voice tight with disbelief. "Mom, this doesn't make sense. Why would Emily hide this?" I stayed calm, letting him read through the files himself. Watching him process the betrayal was more satisfying than any confrontation. He had been blind to her schemes, but now, with undeniable proof, he was forced to see the truth. Next, her friends began questioning her credibility. Subtle nudges I had planted weeks ago, the emails she left open, the comments I casually mentioned, surfaced naturally, creating cracks in her facade. People she trusted started doubting her stories, isolating her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She paced, frantic, desperate to regain control, but the web she had woven around herself had no exit. By the time Emily confronted me, her confidence was gone. The smirk was gone. Only raw, panicked anger remained. "Margaret, you can't do this!" she snapped, her voice shaking. I didn't answer. I let the silence and the mountain of evidence fill the space. Every accusation she hurled bounced off the walls, powerless against the truth. I had prepared for this moment meticulously, emotionally, legally, strategically. She had no defense, no allies, no escape. Andrew entered, his expression a mix of betrayal and anger directed at her, not me. "I trusted you," he said quietly, his voice breaking. Emily tried to deflect, to spin lies, but it was too late. The truth had revealed itself in a slow, unavoidable tide. Her carefully constructed world had collapsed, and I watched from a distance, my chest tight with vindication, but also with a somber recognition of what betrayal does to a family. In the aftermath, the silence was deafening. Emily retreated, broken and exposed. Andrew and I, though scarred, had reclaimed control of what she had attempted to steal. The house, once a battleground of intimidation, felt cautiously peaceful. But the lesson lingered. Betrayal leaves a wound even when justice is served. Trust, once fractured, takes years to rebuild or never returns at all. Weeks passed after Emily's collapse, but the echoes of her betrayal lingered. The house was quieter now, the tension replaced by a fragile calm. Andrew and I had reclaimed what she had tried to take, but every glance at the estate, every conversation, reminded me of how close we had come to losing it all. Revenge had been necessary, precise, and devastatingly effective, but it came with its own weight. I watched Emily retreat into isolation, her confidence shattered. People she once commanded now avoided her, and her manipulations were exposed beyond repair. She had underestimated me, underestimated the power of patience and observation, and yet I felt no joy in her suffering, only a grim recognition that justice, when served carefully, is quieter than rage. It is calculated, inevitable, and final. Andrew approached me one evening, his expression serious. "Mom, I never realized she manipulated me too. I thought I saw clearly, but I was blind." I nodded, my chest tight with the mix of pride and sorrow. Betrayal is contagious, I realized. It clouds judgment, erodes trust, and leaves those affected questioning themselves. But now, awareness had returned, and with it, a chance to rebuild what had been threatened. I reflected on my own journey. That shove in the garage, the scream, the threat, the humiliation, had triggered a transformation. I had discovered patience I didn't know I possessed, cunning I had never needed, and a resolve sharper than I ever imagined. Revenge was never about cruelty. It was about reclaiming power, dignity, and the boundaries others had dared to cross. Emily would remember, long after the whispers died down, that she had been outmaneuvered. And I would remember, too, that the scars of betrayal never fully fade. They only remind you to protect yourself, to trust carefully, and to act decisively when pushed too far. As I sit now in the quiet of my study, the weight of the experience still heavy, but tempered by victory, I understand one truth. Betrayal may expose the worst in others, but it can also reveal the strength within yourself. The storm had passed, but the lessons remained, etched deep into my mind. Cliffhanger and reflection. Revenge is not about anger, it is about clarity. The betrayed can rise stronger, sharper, and wiser if they have the courage to endure, observe, and act. True justice is quiet, patient, and inevitable. If this story resonated with you, please like if you connected emotionally, Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Silent Revenge for more stories where betrayal meets justice. Every tale here reminds us that patience, strategy, and courage can turn the darkest moments into lessons of power and resilience.